All right, here we go. I hope you guys know that I read this in my car with the windows closed because I'm embarrassed that anybody will hear me reading this outside. I can't let my daughter know that I'm reading this either. I'm embarrassed for her to know who I really am. All right, here we go. Chapter 2, the long-awaited. Thank you for everyone who's been following along. This has been the journey of my life. This has been the journey of a lifetime. Oh man, I'm tired. I got some baggy old eyes. Ethan took his time seeing to Butterscotch, leading her to the water trough, and then giving her a good brushing until her coat gleamed. Afterward, he fed her a scoop of oats and set her loose on the pasture to graze until sunset, when he'd put her up in the barn for the night. He knew it was foolish, but the time he spent with the mare made him feel closer to his wife. More than 5 years gone now, closer to her in memory at least. How she loved the mare, their little farm in upstate New York, their quiet life. How she had loved him. He'd been so lost after her unexpected death that he thought he might die of grief. He didn't, of course, just as his wise father had predicted, and as the days turned into months, then years, though he hadn't stopped loving her, the pain was no longer so sharp. Now, after so much time had passed, more often than not, he smiled when he thought of her, rather than cried. Ethan stood beside the gate and watched Butterscotch wander off to graze off in a bed of fresh, flowering clover. Then, his hands deep in his pocket, he walked down the lane toward the harness shop in search of his father. He was still mulling over his conversation with Abigail Stoltz. He was hoping to talk with his father about Jamie and the boy's mother. Maybe he could offer a different perspective. Also, I read so fast. Liz put the YouTube video to 75%, and then it was like normal speed. It's on my mind now. Ethan took his time walking, taking in the 200-acre farm. Whew. Its fields that were now turning green, white fencing, barns, and outbuildings. In the 2 years since the family had moved to Hickory Grove from New York, Miller's shop had flourished. Despite the local competition of Troyer's just 3 miles away, his father had found ways to provide goods and services to both Amish and Englisher customers. Not only did he repair and make nearly any kind of leather work, but he also sold the type of supplies a man with livestock needed. Liniments, wormers, fly and pest control traps and sprays, you name it. And that wasn't all he was selling these days. A year ago, Ethan's stepsister, Bay Laurel, who they just called Bay, had started selling jams and jellies, fresh eggs, preserves, and baked goods. Her single shelf had turned into an entire aisle, and his father... Bay Laurel is a boy? Oh, stepsister, never mind. And his father was considering expanding the size of the store to keep up with the woman's side of the business. Then there was Ethan's brother, Joshua, newlywed, who had built a greenhouse over the winter and was about to open a business selling seedlings, flowers, and vegetable plants. All that, and Benjamin, his father, was still daydreaming of expanding. All that, and Benjamin, his father, was still daydreaming of expanding his business inside the huge dairy barn he'd remodeled. He wanted to go into buggy making. Ethan wasn't much for working in the harness shop. That was why he had taken the job of schoolmaster when the position had become vacant. But buggy making was quickly becoming a passion of his. He still had a lot to learn, but he liked using his hands to make a wheel, a door, a padded seat. Alone in the shop, or even working beside his father, he loved the peacefulness of it. No little girls squirming in their seats, no little boys bringing toads into the schoolhouse, no Jamie Stoltz trying to tip over an outhouse. Ethan's annoyance with the boy came back in a single breath, which turned to near anger towards the mother. He felt sorry for Abigail, a widow alone trying to raise a boy without a father. But surely she understood that it was her duty to control the boy's behavior. Ethan couldn't help thinking that if Jamie was bad at school, it was likely he wasn't at all well behaved at home either. He got that impression from the grandmother. He couldn't remember her name, though they'd been introduced at church. Daniel King, Abigail's father, and his wife had been in the harness shop a couple of times, and they bumped into each other at a dinner celebrating Epiphany back in January. That was just before Abigail and her son had arrived in Hickory Grove. He had heard from his stepsister Ginger that she was widowed 3 or 4 years ago, though Ginger hadn't known any of the details. The fact alone gave him good reason not to judge the woman so quickly. But, "Ethan, you okay?" He looked up. He had been so lost in his thoughts that he hadn't seen or even heard his sister-in-law Phoebe approaching. "I thought you were going to walk right by me." She had met his gaze with a smile. She was wearing a blue scarf tied around her head and the denim coat one of his stepsister had commandeered. Ordinarily, Amish women didn't wear men's denim barn coats, even around their house. But there was nothing ordinary about his stepmother's girls or his brother Joshua's new wife. Sorry. Yeah, just thinking. Yeah, I'm fine," he said. He liked Phoebe. She'd come from a hard life, bringing a little boy with her, but she'd managed to make a new life there in Hickory Grove. She was sweet and kind and fun. But the thing Ethan liked most about her was her resilience. He admitted her ability to see beyond her troubles and find the goodness in the world God provided. He was beginning to think maybe he needed to take a page from her book. As much as he hated to admit that his father and stepmother Rosemary were right, it was time for him to move on with his life. He knew it was what Mary would have wanted. But so far he just hadn't been able to get there. "Been down to the mailbox?" Phoebe said. She held up a bundle of flyers and envelopes. "Something here for you. A bank statement, I think." She stopped in front of him, sifting through the pile in her arms. With a family their size, his father and stepmother, his stepsister, stepbrothers, and brothers still living at home, as well as Phoebe and her son, they numbered 15 at the supper table. And that was if his stepsister Lovey and her family didn't join them. They received a lot of mail. "It's here somewhere," she said, still thumbing through the stack. "Just leave it on the counter," he told her, turning so he was still facing her, backing down the driveway, hands deep in his pants pockets. "Have you seen my dat?" "In the shop, in the back, I think. I stopped to see Ginger on the way to the mailbox. She's working the register." He nodded, turned, and continued on his way. "See you for supper," Phoebe called after him, his back now to her. He raised his hand in response. Ethan found Ginger occupied at the register, ringing up an English woman. "My dat?" She nodded over her shoulder as she dropped fly paper into a brown paper bag. "Back in the buggy shop, I think. UPS delivered leather for seat covers." Ethan went through the swinging half door to get behind the counter, then through the next door and into the leather workshop. He nodded to his brother Jacob, who was busy with an owl patch. AWL. Owl patch. All punching holes in what... Oh, yeah. It wasn't patch at all. He nodded to his brother, who was busy with an awl punching holes in what looked to be like a new bridle he was making. Beside him, seated on a stool, was their 11-year-old boy, Jesse, who was taking... I am losing my mind right now. What? Who was talking a mile a minute about a bass in their pond he was set on catching. Ethan walked through the shop and into a hall where the newly constructed walls had drywall but no paint yet. Doorway cuts in the walls led to empty spaces now that could be turned into additional workrooms or an office if his father wanted to expand later. At the end of the hall, he found the door to the buggy shop open. Benjamin Miller's door was always open, figuratively and literally, and he was not just to his wife and children and stepchildren, but to his community as well. He was a good listener, but he also didn't hesitate to give his opinion if it was asked. His father was the wisest man Ethan knew, and even though he had just had his 33rd birthday, he was still young enough to need his father's guidance occasionally, old enough to know it. Benjamin turned on the stool where he sat at his workbench and peered over the glasses he wore for up-close work. "Get that stovepipe?" Ethan shook his head. "Didn't make it to Byler's. Had a problem with one of my students. Had to take him home. I'll get to my stovepipe tomorrow. Whenever you get to it, we'll be fine." Benjamin looked up at his eldest son, reading glasses perched on his nose. In his 50s, he was a heavy-set man with a reddish beard that was going gray, a square chin and a broad nose. Ethan had his father's brown eyes and his mother's tall, slender frame. "I'm hoping this break in the weather means we won't be needing to light that old wood stove till fall," his father went on, nodding in the direction of the stove they'd recently installed. His father had traded a new full harness for the stove with a man from over in the Rose Valley. Benjamin liked bartering and did it whenever he could. He said it reminded him of his childhood back in Canada. Oh! Where he'd grown up. In those days, he said paper money was rarely exchanged. A checking account was unheard of. The sizable Amish community relied mostly on themselves and traded for everything. Benjamin turned back to the piece of paper he was studying on his workbench, a sketch of the buggy he and Ethan were building together. It was small, open buggy, referred to sometimes as a courting buggy. You said you had a problem with the student. Did you get it worked out? Ethan took a deep breath. He sighed, removed his wide-brimmed straw hat, and ran his fingers through his blonde hair. His graze settled on the box of the cement floor that had been opened to reveal yards of leather they would use later to upholster the new buggy seat. Nay, well, maybe. I don't know. Benjamin removed his glasses. Want to talk about it? Ethan sighed again, and then the whole story just came out. It wasn't the first time he talked to his father about Jamie. He knew the boy had been a problem since he'd arrived at school, but still, he listened patiently, commenting and urging Ethan on as he relayed the most recent incident. When Ethan was done, he dropped down on the stool near the door. I've just had it, Dat. I've half a mind to... He halted and then started again. I've half a mind to resign. Effective at the end of the school year. If I give the school board notice now, they'll have time to find another teacher by September. That what you want to do? Quit teaching? Ethan sat his hat on his knee, studying the courting buggy that was nearly complete. The project was so close to being done that Benjamin was already working on the plans for a more traditional family-sized buggy. I don't know, Dat. I'm thinking maybe there's some truth to what Abigail said. Maybe I'm not cut from the cloth of a schoolmaster. Not sure I agree with that. Other folks in Hickory Grove would say you're the best teacher they've had for their children. Last Saturday, over at the mill, John Fisher was talking about inviting some other Amish teachers, men and women, to our schoolhouse for a day for you to run some kind of training. To get teachers together to talk about ways to teach our children about the world we live in these days. It's not like in my day where we were isolated from Englishers, insulated. No denying that as the world has changed, we've been forced to change. But that doesn't mean we have to give up on who we are. That means we've got to deal with the changes, not just in our homes and in our church, but our schools too. Men like you understand that. You understand how hard it can be for our children to hear the music, see the behavior, and not covet it. Ethan worried his lower lip, thinking. Everything his father said was true. Teaching school wasn't easy. Not with Amish kids being exposed to Englishers, the clothes, the cars, the behavior. You couldn't keep young folks on the farm all the time, so that they had to know how to deal with the world they were supposed to stand apart from. He knew they needed to be guided in how to stay on the path their ancestors had set out for them, and school was one of the places they could find that guidance. What Ethan didn't know was if he was really the one to be doing it. That said, his father went on, if you do decide teaching isn't your calling, you know you can join me here. He gestured to the workshop they were both proud of. Before you know it, Levi will be home and we'll be getting into some serious production. Over the winter, they'd added an overhead door in the shop, being enough to accommodate a buggy. Big enough! And they purchased quite a few tools. A buggy maker had to be welded, an upholsterer, a carpenter, mechanic, and painter, all rolled into one, and he needed different tools for each aspect of the construction. Ethan's brother Levi was staying with friends in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, apprenticing as a buggy maker. His plan was to learn what he could over the next year so that he could return to Hickory Grove. At least that's why he said he'd moved to Lancaster, though Ethan suspected it was the larger population of single women that had attracted him to accept the position. Bad boy. Ethan eyed his father. You think we're ready to get into business, do you? So far, we've just made that new family buggy for ourselves and that one for Lovey and Marshall. And your courting buggy is nearly done, Benjamin smiled, pointing at the sleek black buggy that took up the center of the shop. Ethan shook his head. Not mine. Will and Levi will get some more use of it. Jacob, before you know, Jesse will be taking girls home from singings. Oh my God, 15 minutes. Benjamin hesitated. I know you don't want to hear this. Ethan held up his hand. Dad? I know you don't want to hear it, but I'm going to say it anyway. He got off his stool and walked towards Ethan. Because it's my duty as your father to say things you don't want to hear. Ethan rose, clamping his hat down on his head. It's time for you to marry again, son. S-O-H-N. Sean. Ethan shook his head, surprised by the emotion that rose in his throat, threatening to prevent him from speaking. He took a moment. Dad, he said when he found his voice, we've been over this 100 times. I don't know that I'll marry again. He stared at a spot on the floor, embarrassed by his feelings welling up in him. His father was never one to tell his sons it was the wrong to show emotion. Benjamin Miller was an emotional man. Ethan's brother Joshua too, but Ethan wasn't like them. He didn't know what to do with this sadness, his loneliness, except tamp it down, close it off, stay one step ahead of it. You need to find yourself a nice young woman, marry, have children. Ethan stood there, unable to meet his father's gaze. Benjamin smoothed the straps of his suspenders and then went on. You join me in the shop and we'll start making buggies, not just for family and neighbors, but we'll take orders from Pennsylvania, Ohio, Kentucky even. Rosemary's cousin in Kentucky says that when we're ready, he'll be the first one to put cash on our workbench. He's running a buggy that was his grandfather's because there's no one else making them down here. Benjamin took a step towards Ethan. I'm not getting any younger, you know. Rosemary and we've talked about building a smaller house here on the property. Once you older boys are married and Rosemary's girls, we'll have no feed for such a big house. You marry and start having little ones and the big house is yours. Someday I'll be gone and this farm, this family will all be yours. Now, you know, I've got things worked out so you and all your brothers will have a piece of it. But you'll be the head of this family someday. You'll be here to father your little brothers should I pass before you're all full-grown men. Dad, Ethan murmured. Son, it's what God means us to do. A man is to marry. And to marry, you have to get out there and meet a woman, court a woman. Ethan closed his eyes, beginning to regret having come to his father. After the day he had, he didn't need a lecture. Dad, even if I did have the notion to court a woman, who would it be? Plenty of single young women in Hickory Grove, Benjamin declared, gesturing with his hands. Young? Exactly. Can you imagine me with one of the Gingers or Nesties? Or Nettie's friends? Nesty. Ethan lifted his gaze to meet his father. Benjamin shrugged. So you want a much more mature woman, a little harder to find, but they're around. There's that niece of Eunice's who stays with them sometimes. Dottie? She's not much to look at, but she's a woman of faith. Ethan almost smiled. He knew Eunice Gruber's niece, Dottie. One of his many nieces the women paraded in front of the single men of Hickory Grove, and he knew her well enough to know Dottie wasn't the kind he would court. It wasn't her looks that he cared about. He truly believed that beauty was in the eye of the beholder. It was Dottie's incessant giggling that bothered him. She may have been a woman over 30, but she acted like she was 14. I don't think Dottie is my type, Dat. Fine, he threw up his hands. What about Abigail Stoltz? Nice looking woman. She lost her husband. She understands what it's like to be alone. To Abigail? Ethan demanded, almost laughing out loud. Dad, did you not hear anything I said? She accused me of doing my job poorly. She threatened to have me fired. He shook his head adamantly. I can guarantee you that if I had a mind to court a woman, she'd be the last one I'd pursue. He turned toward the door. I need to move hay before supper. We're short in the barn. Just think on what I said, Benjamin called out after him. I'll think on it, all right, Ethan said to himself as he walked out the door. Now, he was as frustrated with his father as he was with Abigail. All right, I'm going to stop there for now. There's only 4 more pages later. My next episode will be shorter, at least. This is the best book in the world. I think Ethan's going to marry Abigail. I know he's going to court her. I know he's interested. He pretends not to be. Okay, so far, a lot of my fans are saying they're not fans of this series, and you know what? You shut the hell up. I love this book. This is who I am now. I'm an Amish author. I'm gonna write an Amish book after this. I'm gonna have prayer caps. I'm gonna invest stocks into Ethan's buggy enterprise.